Well, it is 11 o'clock Eastern. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Michelle Stinnett with SBP. We have a large group, so we ask that you keep your mics muted throughout the presentation. If you have any questions or comments, please type them in the Q&A box and we will respond to them at the end. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded. I will be sending out the slides from today's presentation later today, so look out for that in your inbox. SBP is a disaster recovery and resilience nonprofit working to shrink the time between disaster and recovery. As a part of that goal, we have partnered with the Walmart Foundation to present webinars focused on educating disaster recovery leaders to fortify people against unnecessary suffering. To do this, SBP has 5 interventions: rebuilding efficiently, sharing our model with other organizations, preparing home and business owners through resilience training, advising municipal and state officials, and advocating for policy changes and improvements to the disaster recovery industry. We believe in a holistic approach to disasters, increasing resilience before and streamlining recovery after. Before I pass it over to JR, I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of our upcoming training opportunities, the first of which is our Leader Practitioner course. This 3-day in-person course will be held January 10th through 12th in Savannah, Georgia, with a dedicated travel day on January 9th. This course is sponsored by the Walmart Foundation, so we are able to cover course materials, lodging, instruction, and travel expense reimbursement up to $650. We are almost full for this course. We only have a few seats left open. So if you are interested, please reach out to JR or Hannah, and both of their emails are there and will be on the slides that I send out afterwards. The next opportunity is our Finance Leader course. This course is also going to be held in Savannah in February, but this is a paid course. It is designed to help finance leaders of DR and MIT organizations be effective and efficient. This course is $2,200 per seat. And if you're interested, same thing, contact JR or Hannah. And finally, we have our webinar schedule for 2023 pretty well set. We're going to be doing webinars at least once a month covering a variety of topics. So we ask that you check out our website that's available on this slide, or reach out to JR or Hannah if you have any questions or want to register for any of these courses for next year. Finally, we're also asking that everyone follows us on LinkedIn. We post all of our training opportunities there, and it allows you to stay up to date with what all of the SBP interventions are up to. And now I will pass it over to JR Sanderson.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it, Michelle. Let's go to the next chart. So today we're going to be spending some time talking about organizational effectiveness. Now, disaster recovery organizations have got to be effective and efficient, and they've got to achieve outcomes. So we're going to spend this morning talking a little bit about how do we achieve that in disaster recovery. Next chart, please. And what we'll do is we'll start off, as always, with our house model. Housing is, everybody always says, well, JR, why do you focus on housing? I do that because housing is the toughest thing. Disaster recovery housing is very, very difficult. It's a hard mission. You're talking about area-wide enterprise level recovery, normally across multiple counties, a wide geographic expanse. So you'd better have your policies, you'd better have your decision-making and leadership solid, or else the rest of the house simply will collapse on you. So we start with that, and let's just spend some time this morning talking about how do we look at our organizations, our disaster recovery organizations, and how do we ensure ourselves that that we're doing the right thing and trying to get the right outcome. So let's go to the next chart. And what we'll talk about here is we'll spend just a few minutes talking about this idea of organizational effectiveness. This is the concept of how effective an organization is, and did we achieve whatever it was we were trying to achieve. And we are certainly focused here, absolutely 100%. Have no doubt in your mind, we're focused on outcomes. We need to put people back into homes as quickly and efficiently as we possibly can using the resources that we have. So let's go to the next chart. And when we talk about OE, we're really talking about these 5 major areas. And we'll spend some time today talking about some of these in detail. But let's kind of break this down. When you talk about OE, you're really talking about succession planning, talent development. How do we bring in young people or middle-aged people or old people like myself who are going to dedicate themselves to this hard work of disaster recovery? How is our organization designed? Do we have the right culture? Can we change when we need to change? And how do we handle change management? And of course, the big one at the bottom down there, performance management. How do we know that we're hitting the outcomes and the targets that we need to hit? How many people are we putting back in homes as quickly and efficiently as we possibly can? So with that, let's move to the next chart. And here, I have to ask a question. Oftentimes we live in a very, very bureaucratic world with the HUD CDBG-DR grant, the HUD mitigation grant, numerous federal cross-cutting requirements associated with both of those. So you kind of have to ask yourself, are you a compliance heavy organization, or are you a commitment heavy organization? And what I say to folks is that these are not mutually exclusive. You have to have both. Look, we have absolutely got to ensure ourselves that we are in full compliance with everything that the federal government is using with these taxpayer dollars when they produce these grants. At the same time, we want a high level of commitment. We want intrinsic motivation here. And we want that because we want people to get out of their cars in the morning and run to work because they enjoy the work, because the work is fulfilling. Look, there is nothing more heart-wrenching than to put a disaster survivor back into a home. So we have to have both of these, right? We have to have a compliance culture and a culture of commitment in order to make this work. So this is both the task and certainly combined here with the people. So just think about that. Think about your culture in your own organization, and think about which one of these you fall into, or are you truly combining both of them? Because that's really the ideal, and that's what we want. Let's go to the next chart. And here I'm going to talk just a minute about the Nadler-Tushman model. And we have, of course, combined this model with the McKinsey 7S model at the bottom, but let me just talk about it. So Nadler-Tushman model basically is the one on the top. And what we're saying here is that we have to have the right strategy, resources, and environment that goes into the work we're doing. The work we're doing is absolutely critical, and that work is we need to recover people from a natural disaster using these federal funds as quickly and efficiently as we possibly can. But if the work does not match the culture of the organization, or if we don't have the right people, or if we have the work but we don't have the right structure, then we're not going to get the output that we want. So this is a really good model for us to look at organizations. So when we're asked to come out and conduct assessments of disaster recovery organizations, this is one of the things we look at. We know we've got the task, we know we have the work, but that work really is based upon what we call the McKinsey 7S model, right? So leaders in organizations, especially in disaster recovery organizations, you've really got to provide a great deal of things here, and we call them the McKinsey 7S model after Dr. McKinsey's model. So leaders have to provide the right recovery strategy. If we don't have a good strategy going into this, we're going to have failure. And strategy really is the interplay with keeping the end in mind and then using the ways and means that we have in order to achieve that. We have to have the right structure. If we're not structurally organized for success, we will not be successful. We have to have the right systems. And of course, if you've been around SBP for any length of time whatsoever, we tell people you really need an information technology system of record that is absolutely critical to all disaster recoveries. We go into so many recoveries where we're trying to do this with a hodgepodge of different information technology systems of record. And we really don't have a good common operational picture of what we're trying to do, and that's frustrating. We have to have the same shared values. Folks, we got to have the right skills. If you're going to be in a disaster recovery world, you need to know a little bit about everything, truly here you need to know everything from eligibility all the way through construction management. You don't have to know the details of all of it, but you certainly need to know, have the right skill set to be able to move your program forward. And then of course, style is important, right? So what's our style? One of the things that we did when I was fortunate to lead the South Carolina organization, the South Carolina Disaster Recovery Office for many years, was our style was to wear blue jeans because We wore blue jeans and a blue shirt. And the reason we did that was we didn't necessarily want somebody from the state government in a suit and tie walking into a disaster survivor's house. That kind of puts you in a bad spot there. So style matters, and of course the right staff. So we combine these two by saying the McKinsey 7S model. This is what leadership needs to provide a disaster recovery organization. That's our inputs. And now we're going to see, are we congruent here? Is the work we're doing, the disaster recovery, is that matching the right culture? Do we have the right people, and do we have the right structure? And our argument is that if one of these is missing, if we have the work and the culture and the structure, but we don't have the right people, we're probably going to fail. If we have the work, the people, and the structure, but our culture's bad, people are going to leave us and we're not going to be successful there. So this is a pretty good model for thinking about disaster recovery. Let's go to the next chart now and talk a little bit about a different way of looking at it. And this is from Bowman and Deal's Reframing Organizations. I believe this is a real good way of looking at the world, because basically their argument is going to be that all organizations, and especially true in disaster recovery organizations, you need a structural component. You absolutely need a human resources component. A political component, whether we like to recognize that or not, is absolutely critical. And there's a heavily symbolic. Folks, we're doing the most noble work in the world here, in that we are putting disaster survivors back into safe, sanitary, and secure homes. And that means something. It means something to us, and it means something to all of us. So you kind of have to balance all four of these, right? So if I'm imbalanced in any of these, I'm going to have a problem organizationally in my disaster recovery effort. So for example, in structural, if I have too much structure, I will have a stifling environment. People will not want to work there because we are so compliant heavy that it's just stifling. If I have too little, however, of structure, then I'm going to end up with limited outcomes because I don't have enough structure to get me to the outcomes that I need to get to. When I look at human resources, if I have too much human resources, then I end up having a little bit of a lack of accountability. But if I have too little, folks are going to walk away from me, and I'm going to have employee retention issues. In the political piece, if I have too much, people will begin to question and say, wait a minute, are you a political organization or are you a mission organization? But if I have too little political, folks, I'm going to have limited influence. And we need to have that influence in order to carry out enterprise level area wide disaster recoveries. And in terms of symbolic, on the far right part of the chart, if I have too much, then basically I'm a cheerleader outfit. I'm not really doing anything of value. I'm just cheerleading. And cheerleading doesn't get us anywhere. So we need to have outcomes. So if I have too little, however, then I could very well be ambivalent and apathetic. So with that, let's charge into this, and we're going to spend some time now with the next chart talking about 7 precepts. A precept is an idea, a concept of my organization, and how do I look at it. And we're going to talk about organizational effectiveness specifically in disaster recovery. So let's go to the next chart. And the very first thing that I will say to you is that the disaster recovery organizations absolutely must focus on the mission. The mission is disaster recovery. You cannot solve every problem in society. Oftentimes we get into a social work environment, and I'm not against that at all. So please don't send me cards and letters telling me that I'm wrong here. But what I will say to you is it's real easy for disaster recovery organizations to chase bright, shiny objects. You need to have basic policies that are going to put people back into homes as quickly and efficiently as you possibly can. You've got an entire world full of stakeholders, and you need to be talking to all those stakeholders continually. And this whole thing starts with an action plan. If I don't have a good strategy going in, as we showed in the Nadler-Cushman model, if I don't have a good strategy, a good plan going in, I'm going to chase that plan throughout the duration of my recovery, and that will become problematic for me over time. Structure is absolutely critical here, in the sense that we need to focus on the mission, and the mission here is to get people back into their homes as quickly and efficiently as we possibly can. So let's go from here to the next chart, and now we're going to talk about you get what you hire. And one of the things that I spend in the human resources development talking about quite a bit is what I refer to as the HTPP cycle. So in essence, what we're going to do is we're going to hire somebody to come in and work with us in this disaster recovery. We need to train that person to do the job they're going to do. And we need to be able to have outcomes from that job. And if we don't, it's our fault because we didn't train them. And then we expect them to produce. We expect all of us to produce. We need to produce, and we need to provide outcomes to people, specifically in disaster recovery, because that's where this whole thing is at. And if they produce for us well, and if they have the skills, knowledge, and abilities we seek, then we promote them. So we try to follow this cycle, and we'll talk just a little bit about this in the following slides. So let's go to the next chart, and let's talk a little bit about hiring here. And what I would say to you in the disaster recovery world is you've got a couple of different methodologies for hiring people. I will tell you straight up, I am a huge proponent of temporary grant employment. The reason for that is oftentimes with TGE employment, we don't necessarily need to enthrall ourselves with the bureaucracy known as human resources at the state level. You could hire full-time people to do this. You can do contracted staff augmentation to do this. But what I will say to you, what you want in an employee, in my humble but highly accurate opinion, is you need an employee that is self-disciplined, meaning that you're not going to have to correct them at every point because they know what they're doing. They understand the job. They know what they're supposed to be doing. They're self-motivated, so nobody has to tell them to come to work during the day. And when they make a mistake, they're self-correcting. They fix it. So the criteria that I use and that we teach in all of our educational doctrine here at SBP about hiring people is three criteria that you can think about, you can use or not use. The first criteria that I use is, can a person think? You can find that out in a job interview. Let's ask them some really, really hard questions and determine what's their cognitive ability. And if they can't think, then I don't know that I need them on my team. So the second one there is, do they have a good work ethic? Look, we don't want to ask anybody to come to work. We want them to get out of their vehicles in the parking lot in the morning and run to the job because they enjoy the job so much. And I think the bottom one down here really is becoming increasingly important, and that is, are they a good teammate? Is it somebody you want on your team? Because that means something to people, to work with people that they enjoy being with. And being a good teammate is a heck of a criteria across the board. Folks have to have the right heart for this, right? If you don't have the right heart for disaster recovery, there's lots of good jobs you can do in the world, but disaster recovery requires a very special heart, a dedication to what we're trying to do here. And folks, you're going to have to fight human resource battles. That's just the nature of disaster recovery, because it's a new organization in a lot of different places. So you really need to think about what those battles are going to look like. Let's go to the next chart and talk here a little bit about training. This is the great hole that we see, is that we hire motivated people to come in and do the job, and we simply don't train them. Now, our view of the world is that if you come into a disaster recovery organization, a couple of things you absolutely have to train on. One is the action plan and all its amendments and modifications, because if you don't know what the strategy is that we were trying to from the start, then I don't know that we're gaining anything. You have to know all the policies associated with the program. Policies are standards, and if we don't have those standards, when we don't have those standards that are written, well written, time-based, time-bound, then we really don't know. And of course, if you have a system of record, you need to train that and all the process flows that are associated with it. We believe strongly in building and training pentathletes. A pentathlete is an athlete that can do more than one thing. They can run, they can jump, they can throw, they can do all the things that you require of them. So let's move to the next chart now, and let's spend just a minute talking about producing. Disaster recovery is all about outcomes. Outcomes. So one of my favorite quotes here is from the great former Green Bay Packer coach Vince Lombardi, who basically had this quote when he said, "What are you going to do, coach?" And he said, "Well, we'll either change people or we'll change people." And folks, you need to be prepared to get rid of those people who are not producing for you. Now, that's a very, very hard, and sometimes it comes off as harsh, but the truth is that this is about production. We're in a production world, and what happens to disaster recoveries is when we fail, they become hyper magnified political events, hyper magnified press events, and you don't want any of that. So you kind of have to ask yourself, what are my standards of performance here, and figure out how much output have you really produced. If this were a private business, if we were doing a private business and we were in the private world, most certainly this would be the number one thing that we would be looking for is production. We are a government organization, so therefore we have a little leeway here, but we need to think in those terms and think about, we're either going to change people and those people are going to produce the way we want them to, or we're going to change people and get new people. So things to think about here. Let's go to the next chart and spend a minute talking about promoting. The Harvard Business Review, I'll encourage you to read that. It's a wonderful publication. And several years ago, they had an article in which they said that they believe that the balance internal to external should be about 60-40. In other words, you need to promote internally about 6 out of 10 times and externally about 4 out of 10 times. That's tended to make sure that the organization stays relatively balanced while continually bringing in new ideas to the organizations. And frankly, folks, let's face it, we all need new ideas. We need new people once in a while who will come in and look at something with an objective set of eyeballs so and tell us where we're really ugly and where we're failing. I believe strongly that you only promote those who have excelled in production. And whatever you do, I tell people in terms of don't ever promote a mediocre performer. If you do that, your entire culture of your organization begins to collapse. And then you become really irrelevant quickly. At the bottom down here, you see promote high performance in your disaster recovery organization, or the contractors will grab them. I'm here to tell you that the contract world is looking for your talent, and they're going to pay more than government will, and they will steal them in a millisecond. So you either grow and protect your own people, or the contract community will. So a thought here specifically for disaster recovery. Let's go to the next chart. And let's talk about precept number 3. Disciplined organizations do routine items routinely. And this is truly structural. What we find is that in a lot of disaster recovery organizations, we simply don't, the organization runs more like a bureaucracy that is ground to a halt rather than a high functioning organization. So the question I ask people is, had you rather go to a McDonald's or had you rather go to a Chick-fil-A? And the answer universally, it seems, is people would much rather go to Chick-fil-A because they know that there's a standard when they walk in the door. The floors are going to be clean, the food is going to be good, the service is going to be good. And so that's a visual disciplinary indicator. Do you look like a McDonald's on the side of the road, or do you look like a Chick-fil-A? And you need to ask yourself that. And of course, we believe strongly in the Toyota Production Systems concept of visual indicators. You need to be able to look at yourself constantly. The other thing that I would say here is that undisciplined organizations oftentimes have leaders solving routine problems every day. You can tell how really good an organization is if leaders are spending time thinking about the next 3 months, the next 6 months, the next year, rather than solving routine daily problems. When you have high leaders in an organization that are spending all of their time solving somebody else's problem, routine problems that is not solved by a policy or structure, then you probably got a problem. We also believe strongly in standardized meetings with agendas, and we'll speak about that in the next charts, the upcoming charts. So let's go to the next one here and spend a little time talking about that. And what we see here is this is a deliberate process flow. We train this in all of our disaster recovery work. Some of you that have been on our webinars before, I'm sure, are sick of seeing it, but it is one of my favorite charts. So this is a deliberate process flow for housing. I have to do outreach and intake of the client because this is an applicant-based system. An applicant-based system means that I have no knowledge of the citizen unless the citizen comes forward and says, I need disaster recovery help. We then need to put that citizen through an eligibility screening to say, citizen, do you meet the requirements that I have set forth in my action plan and my contract with HUD to use this federal money? From there, we need to go to a signing event. And in that signing event, this is all about expectations management. This is what my part of the contract is going to do. And this is what we ask you to do, citizen. So citizen, if you haven't paid your property taxes, we can't help you because at this point, we can't get a building permit in most counties in America to go forth and build. So this is about expectation management. This is where the citizen has to have skin in the game in order to help them recover themselves. We move from there to pre-construction, which is this hard concept of going out and conducting a damage assessment, turning that damage assessment into a estimated cost of repair, and turning that estimated cost of repair into a scope of work that we can hand off to a contractor. And knowing what the cost is going to be roughly, I mean, within 10% before I even go into a job, knowing what it's going to cost me to execute and put that family back into a home. From there, we go into construction, which is the hard building process. And then post-construction really is about warranties and all those things that come after construction that we need to make sure that we did quality work. The more quality work we do in construction, the less post-construction we're going to have. And of course, you absolutely have to have finance and audit and closeout, because these are the things that are transparent, that make us a good governmental organization. So what I say to folks is you have to have a deliberate process flow. It has to be standardized. It has to be known by everybody. So everybody in the organization needs to know exactly where 123 Pine Street is in this process. And it has to be disciplined. If we're not disciplined to use it, then we're going to have problems. And of course, at the bottom down here, we have to have compliance throughout this entire process flow. So let's move to the next chart. And here we're going to talk about deliberate meetings. As I grow older, I'm much more difficult in meetings, because if you're wasting my time as I get older, I guess I think that we only have so much time left. So don't waste my time in a meeting. So let's have standardized meetings, and all those meetings absolutely must have an agenda, and all those meetings have to have a designated lead, and all those meetings need to lead to an outcome. Otherwise, it's just a social event in which we're all sitting around drinking coffee together. Folks, this is, great organizations focus on outcomes. They don't focus on effort. Nobody cares. None of these disaster survivors care how hard you tried. All they care about is, did they get back into a safe, sanitary, and secure home in a reasonable amount of time? So focus on outcomes, not effort. And specifically in your meetings, standardized meetings that are well thought through. This is meeting management 101. Otherwise, we're just having a gaggle, and we have too many gaggles in the bureaucracies today. So let's don't gaggle, let's have meetings. It's a big difference between those two words. Let's go to the next chart. And here is an example of what we used in South Carolina years ago. And in essence, you can see here that we're holding, we call this a biorhythm. That's a military term. And what you can see here is that we're going to start Monday morning off with team meetings. We're then going to go from there to talk about strategic communications, because you have to be communicating with this wide variety of stakeholders that you have, which includes your citizens, which includes your politicians, which includes the local governments. So we need to talk about how we're communicating with them. A couple of times a month, we're going to look at the budget. A couple of times a month, we're going to look at DRGR. On Tuesday, the director meeting was very simple. We come in, we're going to bring all the directors in, and we're going to talk about people and processes and things. We believe strongly in having a special case panel, which most of the things you're going to do in disaster recovery can be covered by policy. I would go so far as to say that 80% of everything you're going to do in disaster recovery can be covered by policy. However, that other 20% needs something special done to it. Because you've had a citizen die, or you've had a contractor overrun, or the great example here in South Carolina is we find that we have a termite infestation inside the substructure floor, which is going to cost us a tremendous change order. So all those things require special case panel. We believe in what we call up here a standing war game. This is when we're trying to figure out the future of the organization. On Wednesday, we always had an all hands briefing. We required the contractor to come in and give a complete end-to-end briefing in which the contractor told us everything that they were doing, exactly where they were working. And you can notice in here that also on Wednesday afternoons, probably the hardest meeting we had all week was the hard case update. You are going to have hard cases in disaster recovery. You're going to have one in which you really want to help the citizen, but there are 1,000 extenuating circumstances. This needs to be a dedicated meeting that you hold in which you are specifically talking about how can we resolve this? Who can we talk to? If it's an heirs property issue, if it is a back taxes issue, but we need to be at least putting these people on the radar. Otherwise, they get dropped. And of course, as the week progresses, about once a month, and South Carolina still does this to their great credit, is we would hold an interagency stakeholder coordination meeting. This meant everybody was invited to the headquarters, and every stakeholder from around the state. And candidly, the most important part of that meeting was the after meeting. And the after meeting was when long-term recovery groups would look me in the eye and say, you're failing here, but you're being successful here. Those are things that leaders have to know about. And you can notice down here, but after that, we had the disaster case management update. And of course, on Fridays, we would do intake construction closeout briefings. So I think that this is a way of doing it. You figure out what's best for your organization. But I don't want to waste anybody's time here. So every one of these meetings had a standardized agenda. Every one of these meetings had a standardized PowerPoint slideshow. Every one of them had a designated outcome, because otherwise we're just having gaggles. So we don't want to put ourselves into a series of gaggles. We want to put ourselves into a series of outcome-based meetings. Let's go to the next chart. And a couple of types of meetings that I think you need. These are up to you as a disaster recovery leader. But you clearly have to look at your comms, your budget. You got to look at your hard cases. And I think you have to have these all hands meetings when we're all coming together. And that's a good time also when, if you need to celebrate birthdays or anniversaries or big events in people's lives, that you can do that and bring a cake in and do those sort of things. So you figure out what the frequency needs to be for your organization. I will say at the bottom, though, that folks, anytime that you can engage stakeholders, and remember, disaster recovery has got 1,000 stakeholders. Every time that you can engage them, you're a winner. So you need to be constant engagement with the stakeholders. Let's go to the next chart and spend just a minute here talking about doing your homework. The truth is that great organizations do their homework. They are proactive. They are not reactive. And they're always trying to know more than their contractors know. And this requires you to spend time doing your homework. I don't know how else to say it. You have to know this business in order to be effective in this business. I think the bigger part over here on the right is just don't be surprised. You need to be as proactive as you possibly can. And again, I personally think that leaders in a disaster recovery organization need to be looking 3 to 6 months into the future, not looking at this afternoon, because because we've got people who can handle this afternoon. That's providing vision to an organization. So in order to do that, you have to do your homework. You have to base your homework on facts, not upon opinions, but upon facts. Let's go to the next chart. And I will say to folks that what we really want is a 90-90 organization. All right. So unfortunately, I don't know how many of you out there have ever worked in a 10-90 organization. A 10-90 organization is where 10% of the people do 90% of the work. Yeah, I heard somebody groan, and you're all on mute, so that's pretty good. So a 10-90 organization is one in which 10% of the people do all the work. And that's an organization that I'm telling you will fail over time, right? So I think it's absolutely critical that all of our employees know what the program will do and what it will provide, and just as importantly, what it will not provide. It's real easy for disaster recovery organizations to become catch-alls. And look, we don't do big screen TVs. We do roofs, we do floors, right? So you need to think about this. Most of the citizens that we deal with are not going to be entitlement people. They're going to be people who are going to be truly grateful for what we provided for them. But we need to think about the essential task, the specific task, the limitations and constraints. And everybody in our organization has to know the process flow. Everybody in the organization has to know the action plan. And this is doing your homework. These are the things that build great organizations. Let's go to the next chart and spend just a little bit of time here talking about making deliberate decisions. Great organizations make deliberate decisions quickly, right? So what I will say to you here is that in terms of options in a disaster recovery program, you really have 3 options. You can create an option, you can preserve an option, or you can foolishly forfeit an option. So think about those, and think about in terms of receiving information. We have 2 types of briefings that we normally teach people about. The first is an information briefing. That's designed to inform people. And the second is a decision briefing. And that's designed to provide the viable options. And again, when I get down here to the options part, we're talking about, I normally almost always want to create an option or preserve an option. And I try my very best never to forfeit an option. But we need to make decisions. We need to make those decisions relatively quickly. If we delay decisions, we are delaying a process and we are delaying people from getting back into their home. And at the end of the day, that's the outcome we're seeking. Let's go to the next chart and spend just a second here talking about making deliberate decisions. So it's unwise, I think, for leaders to make a decision just to show to their employees that they are a decisive person. I think that is an unwise thing, and I think that happens way too often. So here are some things that I put up here that I think may be valuable for maybe a value for leaders when you're thinking about decisions, right? So first thing I ask myself is, when am I required to make that decision? If the decision is not, I don't need to make that decision until April, then why am I making it now? And if I don't have a good answer for that, then don't make it. And whom do I need to coordinate my decision with? Because you are not a universal king, especially in public administration. So you need to coordinate with a bunch of people to tell them this is the decision I'm making and this is why. And that needs to be widely shared. You always need to think about the second, third order consequences of every decision you're going to make, and what were the options available, and how much time do I have to implement those options, and when do I best make decisions. I will tell you straight up, folks, I make better decisions in the mornings. So all of my meetings and all of the decisions, if I have to make a hard decision, I'm going to make it in the morning. You may be an afternoon or a night person. That's up to you. So let's go to the next chart. And here, I want to say, just talking about being disciplined here, oftentimes decisions can have the ugly input of opinions put into them. Now, there's a difference here between opinions and facts, right? So I will say to you that we need to know the facts in all situations. So what we need is, when we're making a decision, is we need for people to lay out all of the facts, and we're going to have a wide variety of opinions among our own staff, among our stakeholders. But the truth is that everything we do needs to be based upon facts. These need to be observable, right? We need to be able to know what we're doing here. The other thing I would say to you in making deliberate decisions is, you need to know what specific problem you're trying to solve. We're normally almost always in the disaster recovery world trying to solve for putting a citizen back into a home in the most efficient and effective manner that we possibly can. So let's solve that problem. Let's don't solve the world peace problem here. So let's stay very, very focused on what specific problem we're trying to solve. And of course, let's think now about, from that, I have to have a couple of options of how I can do that. We need to analyze those options. We need to weigh those options. We need to know what the risks are. And candidly, if you're running a government program, leaders are going to need to have program memorandums, which says, I made a decision on this particular case based upon the facts that I've laid out here, and you put that in your system of record and say, this is the reason we made the decisions that we made. The most important thing here, though, is to deal with facts, not necessarily with people's opinions. So let's go to the next chart. This is a basic decision briefing. Again, I always start with, what problem are we trying to solve? What are the facts and what's the timeline? If I consistently ask those 4 questions, including the assumptions, then I'm probably going to be okay. So when I look at options, the way that all of you have done this, whether you've bought a house, whether you've bought a car, or whether you've attracted a mate, at some point in your life, you have gone through a strategy of looking at options and weighing out options. So, well, the way that we look at the world is we try to define options and have 3 options that I know I can live with, 3 options that I know that whatever decision is made, I can live with all 3 of those. And then we're going to weigh the advantages and disadvantages of each, the risk associated with each, the cost of each. And then from there, we're going to make a decision. So that's a good way of looking at the world. Some people will say, well, this is overly simplistic. What I will say to you is, by doing this in a deliberate manner, and if you're dealing strictly with facts, then I think you will come to an objective and good decision that is certainly defensible in the disaster recovery world. Let's go to the next chart. Precept 6 is one of my favorites, and I believe in this strongly. It's simply the fact that, look, in disaster recovery, this is very, very complex and things change quickly. So job 1 is making sure that all of our people know what is going on here, right? So I believe strongly in organizations that over-communicate. Over-communicate, sometimes people will gripe and say, well, I got too many emails, or I got too many texts, or whatever. My view of the world is that's okay if an organization is doing that. I don't think that the text and the emails need to be meaningless. They certainly need to have meaning in them. But what I would say to folks is that if we don't do this, our number one job complaint for most people in America today is I don't know what's going on. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. Clearly employees can't read your mind. Guess what? Employees forget. Employees get distracted. Employees may or may not have bought into your rationale or your shared values. And candidly, employees drift off course. So what I would say to you is by over communicating, we're trying to account for that. Even though we've hired the right people, all of us in here will fall into one of those categories at some point today. I know I will, right? Think about that, and over communication is the best way of trying to resolve this. Let's go to the next chart. And now we're going to talk about Precept 7, which is the last one, in which we talk about hard conversations. Folks, look, in the world today, especially in the disaster recovery world, what I say to people is if you aren't willing to have hard conversations, then candidly, you're not willing to lead. And leadership is not something of you, for you, or about you. We need to be able to have hard conversations. So two types of those. One is internal. The internal is with our own team. When we have teammates who are under producing, then we need to have a conversation with them. If we don't do it, then that problem is simply going to grow up and it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And we didn't do anything about it, so we own it. The second one is going to be with stakeholders and or contractors. Look, you need to be able to have hard conversations with them. You need to be able to talk about performance. You need to talk about resolving conflict. Candidly, you need to be able to talk about termination. Maybe we need to end this relationship. We need to do that in a respectful way, but maybe we need to end it. And we need to avoid talking into frustration. So if you're just frustrated, that's probably the wrong time to have a hard conversation. Let's go to the next chart here, and we'll build on this by talking about how do I prepare for that. Well, candidly, we're all the way back now to not avoiding it, right? So if you know you need to have a hard conversation, folks, have the hard conversation. The stress is just on you because you're waiting to have the hard conversation. So take that out, take that stress off of you by doing your homework and then having the direct conversation. Leaders select the time and the place. We believe that you have to be direct, specific, execute your plan. You certainly need to have absolute 100% control over your emotions here. So watch your tone and your language, manage your emotions, ask the right questions, and then you provide the solution. And the solution, of course, may be that we need to do something different here. So let's go to the next chart. And I would like to just spend just a second here talking about a couple of precepts that Toyota has brought to the world in their lean manufacturing pitch that I think is absolutely critical in all aspects of disaster recovery. So let's go to the next chart. And what you will see here is that four guiding principles. When you think about disaster recovery, folks, this is a long-term. That's why it's called long-term disaster, right? So we have to have a long-term philosophy. I believe strongly that the right process will produce the right result, and we have provided you with what we believe is a viable model. If you come up with a better model, then use what you got. We believe strongly that you add value by training your own people. The more competent and committed your people are, the more trained they are, then the more competent they become, which gives them more confidence, which means they are more valuable to you. And candidly, folks, we've got to solve root problems. I'm back here now to hard conversations. If I don't solve the root problem, then what ends up happening to me is that problem grows and grows and grows. I will say to you that great disaster organizations think this way. So I will encourage you to think this way. Let's go to the next chart. This is the right process will produce the right result. And I just ask that you look at the chart and think about it for a second. What you don't want to do is on the bottom. What you don't want to do is go from step one to step two and wait a minute, I screwed something up. I got to go back to step one. I'm now going to go from step two to step three. Wait a minute, I screwed something up. I got to rework. So what we don't want to have is rework in the process, right? If we have a poor process, we have poor standards for what we're trying to accomplish. We have a poor handoff. That equals consistent rework. And that's a bad process. So what we want to be able to do is have something that's smooth and efficient, which looks more like the top example up here of 1 to 2 to 3. Everyone in the process can define who their internal customer is, who they're working with, who needs what. And that allows us all to be proactive. And candidly, I think people want to be proactive, especially at work. Let's go to the next chart. And here we're going to spend just a time talking about, just a second, talking about solving root problems, okay? So here's what happens to us if we don't solve a root problem. If we detect a problem in disaster recovery, specifically, I'll use the example of disaster finance, and we come across this problem, if we don't solve it, then that problem is going to grow. And by the time we get to month 4 or month 5, then all of a sudden it's a great big problem. The example that I use when I teach this in person is, most problems begin as little bitty stones that are in my shoe that are problematic. But if I don't stop right now and take the rock out of my shoe, before long, I've got a great big boulder that I'm trying to push around the office. So you can think about that, put it into your own words. But I think it really helps to think about this idea that we need to solve problems as quickly and efficiently as we can. Don't let them grow, because problems will always, always grow. Let's go to the next chart. And here, what I will say to you is use only proven technology. We believe this strongly. Don't buy junk and hope it works. You need to have a proof of concept. Do your homework on the technology you're buying. But I will say this, that bad technology really frustrates good employees. And that hurts a lot of people. And your people will walk away because you're not listening to them. So things to think about there. Let's go to the next chart. And I will say this to you, is that what we hope all of you do is become a learning organization. A learning organization is one that says to itself, hey, look, I've got a problem. I'm trying to solve my problems. I'm clearly trying to put clarity on things. I'm trying to evaluate everything that I'm doing, and I'm trying to standardize it. So an Appalachian proverb that I have down here at the bottom is, the difference between a wise man and a fool is the wise man doesn't make the same mistake twice. Folks, we're all going to make mistakes, especially in disaster recovery. It is very, very complex. It is hard work, and I admire you all for doing it. Having said that, we don't want to make the same mistake over and over and over and over again. So with that, let's go to the next chart. And what I will say to you is, this is our house. We start at the bottom with leadership and decision making, and we work our way up to the top to where we have good outcomes. And that's what we're after here. Let's go to the next chart. And we stand ready now, Michelle and I do, to answer any questions or comments you may have, or anything you'd like to talk about. And Michelle, I'll pass it to you now to see if you have anybody in the chat box.
Thanks so much, JR. I will read any questions if there are any from the Q&A box. It doesn't look like we have any. If anybody has any questions, either put them in the chat or into the Q&A box. Well, while we wait for anybody to ask any questions, why don't we go back through kind of what our upcoming training opportunities are, just to remind everybody. Let's see here. There was a question in the chat about whether or not you will get a copy of the slides. I will be sending them out after this webinar.
Okay. Well, look, folks, we hope that you'll join us at one of our in-person trainings. This is a 3-day event. The next one will be January 9th to 12th. We're going to be doing this in Savannah. We normally have a great time, and our folks really enjoy coming and spending time with us. We learn so much from grantees. And so thank you for coming. Thank you for being interested. If you are interested in this, certainly send Hannah or myself an email. Let's go to the next chart. So the finance course, I believe, is one of the absolute critical things that you can do to make yourself better as an organization. Michelle is an absolute genius in teaching this, and it is a great, great course. So if you really want to know the ins and outs of DRGR and finance operations, included with all the myriad of federal cross-cutting requirements, this is the place for you. So if you're interested here, we'd love for you to join us. Next chart, I think we show specifically all of our upcoming webinars. We've planned these out for the next year. Again, these are paid for by the Walmart Foundation, so we thank our sponsor. But we're going to be talking about a lot of different things in disaster recovery over the next year, and we just hope that you'll join us. And if you have folks around you that you want to add into the webinar series, then certainly you're free to ask them to join us. And then finally, we ask that you follow us on LinkedIn. Michelle, back to you.
We had one more question come through asking what proven technology has worked for your organization.
So there are a billion different information technology systems of record. All right. So I will tell you that they are out there. They're everywhere. You can work through whichever one you want. But what I will say to people is that you can end up paying a lot of money for an IT system of record. But it is so important that everybody be able to get on that, from the disaster case manager to all the way down to the finance director, right? Everybody needs to be able to look at an individual case. And so there are numerous information technology systems of record, but it just strikes me sometimes that we tend to buy what the county bought or what the state bought back in 2008, and we're trying to adapt it rather than trying to get something that we know that will work specifically for disaster recovery. And I hope that answered the question. Michelle, add on there, because you have much more knowledge in this than I do.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few that work, and there are a few that work well for or depending on what type of programs you're running. So a lot of Salesforce-based systems of record have the ability to be customized to whatever your program that you're running. There are a few that certain contractors have that are very nice products, but are very expensive. And then there are a few that are specific to housing that work if you are only running housing programs. When I send out this slides, if anybody has any specific questions that they want to delve into, both JR and I's emails will be on there. And it does look like we got one more question on what are your thoughts on dealing with insubordination in the DR team?
Well, the question was insubordination.
Correct.
Wow.
No.
It's been years since I've had that. So, look, I mean, the one thing I would say is that if you have an insubordinate, somebody who's rude and they're tearing up your team. So what I say is you got to stop immediately. I'll go back to the Toyota hard conversation piece, and I'll go back to the root problem piece. So if I don't solve this problem right now, right this very minute, then the truth is that this problem is going to grow on me. So anytime that you have something in the workplace that is out of sorts, it's my opinion, my professional opinion, that you absolutely have to deal with it immediately. This is get everybody else out of the room. This needs to be a singular one-to-one conversation in which you tell the person, look, that was inappropriate, that was wrong, and I candidly will not stand for it as your boss. And if it happens again, then I'm going to move on through the disciplinary system. Michelle?
Yeah, and then one last question, and then we will wrap it up. There was one here saying, how significant is it to have a contract administration software?
Don't know that I understand the nature of that one. Help me.
Well, so similar to a system of record, a lot of organizations have contract administration software. So when you're running it through the process, I think it's just as important. Having visibility into the process makes.
Yeah, I think so. I think that what you absolutely have to know at any given time, and you need to be able to do this in a matter of minutes, not hours, is if you get a call, and this was my standard, so maybe this will help answer the question. If I got a call from somebody in the South Carolina State House or the State Senate or the governor's office, and they were asking me about 123 Pine Street, my standard was that in about 15 minutes, I need to know everything there is to know about 115 Pine Street. And a system of record covers that. So a good system of record is going to be able to have every conversation that we've had with the citizen in the notes portion. It's going to have all the photographs of the disastered home before, during, and after the construction that took place. And so that I can give at that point a reasonable answer to including what it cost me to fix it. And if it takes us days to answer questions about 115 Pine Street, then we probably do not have an outcome of the system that we're looking for. And I hope that made sense. Back to you, Michelle.
And with that, I will wrap this up. If anybody does have any additional questions for JR, myself, anybody else on the SVP team, I will have all of our emails included at the end of this when I send out the slides to everyone that was on here. We look forward to meeting with you on future webinars or in person at one of our leader practitioner courses. And thank you again on behalf of SVP and the Walmart Foundation, and everybody have a great rest of your day.